Morning. Welcome, everyone. It's 8:06 in the East. Do you know where your children are? I am struggling with a inoperative webcam for the moment. So I'm going to be using my computer's inboard camera for today. I had lent my computer lock, stock, and barrel to my wife yesterday. And the result is we unplugged everything. And now I don't know how to get my camera functional again. So I apologize for that, but we will muddle through anyway. And my usual reading partner, Jordan Hoggard, has moved his home from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania to Taos, New Mexico. And as a result of that fact, it's 2 hours earlier for him. I guess it's 6 a.m. in Taos in Mountain Time, I suspect. And so I'm not sure he's going to be able to join us. But if he does, that will be great. If not, I will continue on anyway and work with the commentaries that come up on the YouTube chat. Good morning, Big Cat, and good morning, N1. Just out of curiosity, I would love for the two of you to identify in what country you are operating. I'm just curious, but you don't need to do it if you don't want to, but if you, it would be great. And Harriet, it would be great if you're so moved, you can go to chat, move your cursor to the bottom of the Zoom screen, and you'll see chat. You can click on that, and then you will see a chat panel, and you could put your state or country there. Good morning, Annette. Nice to see you. So we have Wales and Ireland represented already. Thank you. Thank you, Annette. Nice to see you. Okay, so I'm going to continue on with Diane Croft's book, The Unseen Partner, Love and Longing in the Unconscious, which I consider to be a précis of individuation itself. It's quite a moving book, and the Big Cat is in Ohio. Okay, that's not a foreign country. That's good. It's good to attract some Americans. And Nick is here, and he's from Singapore. So we're getting a worldwide audience very early this morning. So the first topic for today, though, is silence. And let's see, I guess I'll have to stop my virtual background in order to be the one showing you. Okay, so Diane's book is set up with a poem that was given to Diane during a 3-year numinous period. Then on the left page is an image that she puts. And then on the right page, there's a quote, and then Diane's commentary on the idea. And the idea for today is silence. And so I'll just read the poem first. Silence spoke to sound, pervasive and persuasive. No other came before her. Sound felt small, fragmented, momentary. Silence forgave sound again and again. She remained eternally his. And I think that's just quite lovely. So I'm going to read it again. As I say, Diane had a series of, she says she wrote 700 poems during this 3-year period. and they were just given to her. They would just come to her numinously. So read it again. Silence spoke to sound, pervasive and persuasive. No other came before her. Sound felt small, fragmentary. Silence felt small, fragmented, momentary. I'm sorry, it wasn't sound. I am misreading this poem entirely, so I'm going to reread it. I apologize for that. It's early. I know it's early for everyone. So, and hello from Bangkok. So let me start again, because I read silence in the second verse and it's actually sound. So let me read it again. Silence spoke to sound, pervasive and persuasive. No other came before her. Sound felt small, fragmented, momentary. Silence forgave sound again and again. She remained eternally his. And then there's this image of a woman in a mirror, it looks like, with her finger over her mouth. And the caption is Silence About 1911 by Odilon Redon, 1840 to 1916, French oil on prepared paper, 21 and a half by 21 and a half, the Museum of Modern Art, Lily P. Bliss collection. And the quote is from the Nag Hammadi. I am the thought that dwells in the light. I am the movement that dwells in the all. She in whom the all takes its stand, the firstborn among those who came to be. She who exists before the all. And that's from the Thunder Perfect Mind from the Nag Hammadi. Okay, so now I'm going to read Diane's commentary. I have a favorite saying. Silence. I have a favorite saying. The end is present at the beginning. So with that in mind, I ask myself, what was present at the beginning that I can only see now at the end? Especially, I wonder who is the she in no other came before her. Interestingly, the notion of a female form of God, immanent in creation, resided in the collective psyche for thousands of years, mythically depicted as wisdom. In oral and written traditions, cross-culturally, the divine feminine has taken such forms as the primordial light of creation, the wisdom of the serpent, the burning bush seen by Moses, the inspiration of the dove, the embodiment of the tree of life, the Holy Spirit, the Word, Logos, truth, world soul, Shabbat bride, and the wife of God. Interestingly, as I was writing this commentary, I noticed a headline in the New York Times. Quote, National Nuns Group dodges slowdown with Vatican. I'm sorry. I need to wake up this morning. Quote, National Nuns Group dodges showdown with the Vatican, seeking dialogue. The decision to seek a dialogue came after more than 900 nuns, representing about 80% of the Catholic nuns in the United States, spent more than 4 days listening to the Holy Spirit inside a hotel ballroom in St. Louis. The Vatican had accused the group of promoting radical feminist themes incompatible with the Catholic faith. As a woman living in the 21st century, I concur with Jung, who argued for the recovery of the lost feminine. within the sacred psyche. She remains eternally his. Quote, and then there's a sort of a footnote. Okay, it's a footnote on the lost feminine. By this, I mean the feminine principle in both men and women. Okay, so we've been talking a lot about that. So I've been reading Silence by Diane Croft, and it's quite a lovely. I have come to the end of Diane's book. There's a epilogue. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Okay. All right. So Silence was actually the last entry in Diane's book, except for an epilogue, which I will get to after a bit. There are a couple of other things, but I've been reading from The Unseen Partner, Love and Longing in the Unconscious by Diane Croft. And I hope you'll get your own copy. It's quite a beautiful book. Tohana. Or Jeep, I do not know Haryana Tohana. From what tradition is that? And that says, it reminds me of the silence in a rose garden. Quite right, I suppose. Okay. So I've been reading also in tandem Jerry Wright's book, which now I will go to in earnest after this session. But Jerry Wright's book is Mystical Path Less Traveled, a Jungian Psychological Perspective, journal notes, poems, dreams, and blessings. Jerry Wright has served as a Presbyterian minister for 25 years. And then, as he says, he fell off the back porch of the church, and now he's a Jungian analyst and semi-retired, I think. Anyway, his journal entry. A mystical path bridges all artificial divides and dualities where converging opposites give birth to paradox. And then he's got several bullet points under this. The bullet first is not spirit and matter, but spirit in matter. Matter suffuses with spirit. And so obviously we know that all matter is made up of atoms, and they contain both neutrons and electrons. And as a result of that fact, matter is always moving. And so there is spirit in matter, as we moderns know. Second point, not heaven and earth, but heaven in earth, and earth suffused with the sacred. And that's a very powerful concept, something that has been talked about by the mystics for thousands of years. I mean, literally, there is imagery in Ion, I believe it is, or no, I think it's an Ion, and it's in Edinger's commentary to Ion, the Ion lectures, in which it shows the four rivers of the psyche, and then the fifth river is the human being speaking forth. And so heaven is in everything. And I've been dealing with Jason Smith, who's written this wonderful book called Religious But Not Religious. And one of the things that he quoted or said, I don't remember whether it was original to him, but God is not a being, God is being itself. And I think that that's a very powerful idea. Okay, and then Jerry says, not divine and human, but divinity in human, and human suffused with divinity. So again, the sacred is within us. And I always think back to the only four questions that matter to Don Juan DeMarco, which are, what is sacred? Of what is the spirit made? What is worth living for? And what is worth dying for? And the answer to all four questions is the same, only for love. And so I'll just say that once more. What is sacred? Of what is the spirit made? What is worth living for? And what is worth dying for? And all those questions are questions that we all should be reflecting upon. And the last one in Jerry's rumination is, not God and man, but God and goddesses in everyone and everything. And of course, this is an essential idea from Jungian psychology as well, that we are the gods, and it's contained in the last paragraph of Answer to Job, and I'll just read that paragraph. But I want to caution everyone, as Dr. Jung cautioned, that if we all contain an essence of divinity, but we can't let that inflate our psyches, because there's 8 billion of us, and 8 billion gods and goddesses running around might get a bit too much unless we tone it down. And what Jason Smith was talking about it in Religious but Not Religious is that when Jesus became man, he had to experience kenosis, which was emptying himself of all his powers of divinity, so that he could actually bring himself down to the human scale. And so let me so I'll just read half of this paragraph, and it's paragraph 758 of Answer to Job, which is found in volume 11 of the collected works of C.G. Jung, or as in my copy, it's a separate book. Therefore, the question as to whether the process is initiated by consciousness or by the archetype can never be answered, unless, in contradiction to experience, one either robbed the archetype of its autonomy or degraded consciousness to a mere machine. We find ourselves in best agreement with the psychological experience if we concede to the archetype a definite measure of independence, and to consciousness a degree of creative freedom proportionate to its scope. There then arises that reciprocal action between two relatively autonomous factors, which compels us, when describing and explaining the processes, to present sometimes the one and sometimes the other factor as the acting subject, even when God becomes man. The Christian solution has hitherto avoided this difficulty by recognizing Christ as the one and only God-man. But the indwelling of the Holy Ghost, the third divine person in man, brings about a Christification of many. And the question then arises whether these many are all complete God-men. Such a transformation would lead to insufferable collisions between them, to say nothing of the unavoidable inflation to which the ordinary mortal, who is not freed from original sin, would instantly succumb. In these circumstances, it is well to remind ourselves of St. Paul and his split consciousness. On one side, he felt he was the apostle directly called and enlightened by God. And on the other side, a sinful man who could not pluck out the thorn in the flesh and rid himself of the satanic angel who plagued him. That is to say, even the enlightened person remains what he is and is never more than his own limited ego before the One who dwells within him, whose form has no knowable boundaries, who encompasses him on all sides, fathomless as the abysms of the earth and vast as the sky. And so you heard it all there, but basically what Dr. Jung is saying is that we all have a speck of God within us, and we need to be conscious that we have powers beyond our imagination. And as many of you know who have studied the Tarot with me, we all stand at the eternal moment. At every moment, we have a choice about how we will live our lives. And that's reflected in the Tarot by the Magician card, because the Magician card is pointing up with his wand and down with his other hand, as above, so below. And he has on his table the 4 tools of the Tarot from the Tarot suits, the wands, the swords, the cups, and the coins. And the magician at that moment that is represented there can select which one to work with. And so it is with all of us. In every moment, we can all select, and we all decide what the future will be on a day-by-day basis. And we have the ability to change at any time. Okay, so so Diane has an epilogue, so I think in fairness, I should read her epilogue. And so I'm going to do that. And she also has about the cover, because the cover has quite a unique creature there. And so I'll also read that. So, epilogue, a personal journey. This is one woman's experience of the unconscious as recorded in the 21st century. While some psychological truths may be laced within the narrative, it does not represent absolute truth. All experience is subjective and all truths are partial. Believing in the one true way is how religions, cults, and societies get started. One person has an encounter with the numinosum, records the experience, and people in search of their own myth climb aboard. These experiences are important. They remind us that there is another dimension to life beyond our daily routines. But the process of individuation is a personal one, not one of imitation. As Jung posed the question, quote, are we to understand the imitation of Christ in the sense that we should copy his life and, if I may use the expression, ape his stigmata, or in the deeper sense that we are to live our own proper lives as truly as he lived his in its individual uniqueness, unquote. Jesus was considered a heretic in his time. His vision of the Godhead was different from anything the world had known before. The same could be said of Buddha, of Gandhi, of Muhammad, or Moses. Each moved away from doctrinarism toward a personal relationship with a great living presence as they experienced it. None left humanity behind, but were engaged in bringing the truth they found into the world in creative service. My own myth, drawn from a universal database of archetypal imagery, is fashioned from my personal complexes, both mother and father, my innate nature as an introverted intuitive, and my personal image of the divine, shaped as a child by the Lutheran faith, duly saturated with images of Jesus. Lord knows I was searching for his message of unconditional love. Had I been raised as a male child in abject poverty in India, I might have drawn upon the mythology of Krishna, a godchild, prankster, and model lover to satisfy my longing for wholeness. As Plato put it, we took the long for what we lack. Oh, I'm sorry. As Plato put it, we look long. I'm sorry. Once again, as Plato put it, we look and long for what we lack. Regardless of the factors that shape our individual stories, we are all responsible for becoming more conscious. The first step, paying serious attention to the unconscious, sets everything else in motion. The collective unconscious is not human. It is a boiling cauldron of conflicting opposites. Only responsibly conscious individuals can humanize and transform its enormous energies for the good. As Rumi warned, don't go back to sleep. Wake and dip your cup into the living waters. That's quite beautiful to me, and I think Diane's entire book is quite beautiful. And I wanted to demonstrate in this group that I had read the entire book. So I was reading The Unseen Partner by Love and Longing in the Unconscious by Diane Croft. And I will say that Diane is quite an introverted person. She's appeared twice on our wisdom path, but she refused to allow us to record those sessions. And as a result of that fact, only those present heard her wisdom. I continue to be in contact with Diane, and I look forward to, in the future, involving her in more of our activities. But that's where we are right now. And I'll read the description of the cover here in a minute. Abraxas says, I suppose the dirt beneath our feet is just as much God than anyone else. Yes, I would agree with that. Dirt is being, and we're all descended from dirt, actually, because life itself emerged about 3.5 billion years ago on this planet with single-celled organisms, and the rock was here long before that, probably 500,000 to a billion years, 500,000 to a billion years before there was any life. And one says, 100% without love, we are robotic and lifeless. And so I'm going to help you with that in a little while here. But you have to find life. And so I'm going to go back now to Jerry Wright's book, A Mystical Path Less Traveled. And I'll read the next journal entry. A mystical path leads nowhere fast, since it is already everywhere and everywhen. There is no other place to go when the sacred is everywhere, and when every moment, every person, and every event are manifestations of the holy. The goal is not to arrive, but to walk with directed attention to the where and when of the moment. The path can never be completed, yet can never be abandoned except at the peril of soul. Stated another way, we are not obligated to complete our unique psychological contribution, nor are we free to abandon it. That's for sure. Okay. Yes. As some of you may know from having tried to do something that yourself didn't want to do, it's impossible. And Dr. Edinger talks about you having an accident, and my accident was, myself didn't think that I should ever be a general in the Marine Corps, but in my conscious mind, that was my goal. I was trying to become a Marine Corps general. And so on January the 4th, 1990, myself created an accident which broke my leg. And fortunately, it happened while I was in uniform, and therefore the Marine Corps was obliged to fix my leg, but something that I've been troubled with ever since, or at least until Valentine's Day of 2018, when I had my my ankle replaced entirely with a nice little stainless steel ankle. And so the result of that fact is that now it feels almost like the original. I struggled for about 27 years. Was it? No, 17 years. No, 28 years. Okay, from 1990 to 2018, 28 years with the repair that the Navy doctors at Bethesda made. It worked well enough, but I had this iron rod in my ankle, and my ankle worked well enough, but in 2018, there came a time that it had to be replaced entirely. And so now that's been done, and I am on with my new ankle, which I'm very pleased with, I must say. And so Cotty Willoughby says, how can a person effectively navigate the anima animus, Gestalt therapies, prayer, meditation? What are your thoughts on this topic? Well, first of all, I would say that the essence to navigating them is to first understand that they exist and what they are. And so for me, I know what my anima looks like, and I'm going to share that with you here. I just have to get something off my screen. Okay, so my anima, in very general terms, looks exactly like this. And this is my mother, at age 18. I was born 1 year later, believe it or not. I was born, I guess, a little bit more than a year later, because I was born in October of the year after she graduated from high school. And I specifically remember driving across the country with her, just she and me and my two little siblings, brother and sister. My sister was 9 months old at the time, and my mother was 25 when we did this. And she drove from Philadelphia to Seattle by herself. She did everything herself, and then set us up in a motel in Seattle for 2 months so that we could get shipping to Kodiak, Alaska, where my father was stationed in the U.S. Navy. And I remember specifically driving across Montana one time, and my mother looking down at me. I was 5 years old. And I realized that I was in the car with a goddess. Now, I had no words for that at the time. And as you see, it gets me quite emotional now, even talking about it. But I had that aha moment, and I've never forgotten it. And so my anima, I've been married twice, and my anima, in both cases, the women that I was attracted to were, had long, dark hair like my mother, and in just general, they appeared to my anima as that's the woman for me, and for women it would be that's the man for me. And I'm leaving aside issues of gender for now, but because most of us will have an anima or animus of the opposite sex. That's not necessarily always true, but anyway, it's the opposite, that you say that's the one for me. And the problem with that is, and why you have to be conscious of it, is because that applies to anyone who meets the standard of this psychological function. In my case, the anima, but if you're a woman, it would be the animus. And so you could easily fall in love with someone to whom you're not married also. And that happens to me often. And so now I've realized, and I know that when it happens to me, I have to say, wake up, Skip. You're already married, and she also has flaws. And so that's sort of how the anima or animus works in you. And it sort of relates to the honeymoon period, where you fall in love with someone and oh my God, this is the perfect person for me. And you get married, and the honeymoon period, you're in this glowing cloud for maybe 6 to 10 weeks if you're lucky in a marriage. And then pretty soon you find out that this person that you're sleeping with every night isn't necessarily the person you thought they were. And that's because you have projected onto your anima or animus what you thought was perfect, and you find out that, oh no, this person isn't perfect. And that's when the serious work of a marriage begins. And we we all need that serious work. I mean, if we look at the yin yang symbol, we need an opposite number to bring us out, to develop wholeness in our lives. And very often there are differences of opinion. And, I have this coffee cup mug that I sometimes use, and it says on it, if a man speaks in the desert and no woman hears him, is he still wrong? And the answer, of course, is yes, because either a man or a woman, without being heard by the opposite sex, is only going to bring half of the story. And so my wife and I are fortunately very compatible, but we do have some differences, unfortunately. By using our knowledge of the Myers-Briggs type indicator, we are able to recognize when our counterpart is coming up with something that's opposite of what we think, and then we can talk ourselves around it, or we can reflect on it, and it doesn't end the marriage. But one of the dicta of the Myers-Briggs type indicator is that you should have 2 or 3 of the psychological types the same. So this is introvert, extrovert, sensing, intuitive, thinking and feeling, and judging and perceiving. And the way it works for me and for my wife and I, we're both introverted, so we're fine being at home reading a book. We're both very, very intuitive, and our problem is that we don't get all the details sometimes, because a sensing person, in the sensing intuitive scale, a sensing person gets all the details. So the way I say it is, you can show a sensing person 1,000 trees and they won't believe there's a forest. You can show an intuitive person 3 trees and they assume there's a forest. And so both of my wife and I are out at that extreme. And so we get it very quickly. We make a global assumption about anything that's going on. The third level is thinking and feeling. A thinking person is very incisive and discerning about splitting one thing from another, let's say, of sorting. And so there's a fairy tale about how a woman has all these seeds on the floor and she has to sort them well. So thinking people can sort very well. Feeling people don't have to sort. You can be anywhere on the scale of any of these. So for example, when I was learning long division, when I was in the 4th grade, the teacher, of course, taught us the method for drawing out long division, and that's a very thinking type of thing to do. But in my case, I never had to do that. I never had to draw the little upside down L and put the numbers in the right places. And the reason for that is I could just see the answer. And that's probably a part of my intuitive function, that I could just intuit the answer. I got the answer. Feeling people, decide things based on how they feel about them. And so it's the traditional separation between men and women. However, in testing over the last century, we now know that men and women are actually becoming pretty well balanced in what in where they stand. And so it's not strictly uh, strictly women who have the feeling function. I mean, you observe the feeling function when I started to talk about my mother being a goddess. That was a very emotional moment for me, and it still is. And so that's my feeling side kicking in. But usually I'm a very thinking person. So my wife and I are introverted, intuitive, and thinking. Now, where we differ is that she is a very judging person and I'm a perceiving person. That's where we differ. We only have one difference. And the result of that is that um, judging people tend to want to have a list when they go to the grocery store, while a perceiving person just goes to the grocery store and starts taking things off the shelf. And they may have a general idea of what they want to pick up, but the way it works for us is my wife has a shopping list, and she makes sure we get nutritious meals into the house, and I buy the ice cream. It's the way it works for us. And so it's best to have two or three of those characteristics the same if you're going to marry someone, because if you only have one that's the same, if you only have one characteristic the same, then you're going, or zero the same, then you're going to have too much conflict in your life. And if you have them all the same, then it's just boring because you're always thinking the same way and finishing each other's sentences and that sort of thing. And so I'm still in the school that whenever I say anything, I'm always wrong. And then my wife tells me how I'm wrong, and then we negotiate the central place. So we're talking about anima and animus. And I told you how it works somehow. And so what I would suggest is that you try to understand the image of your perfect match, and just pick up magazines, for example, and just see who which person in general in photographs and magazines are you drawn to, and you'll actually feel that. And that'll give you a sense of what your anima is, or your animus. And because I've been studying Jungian psychology for 35 years now, almost, or 34 years this year, I guess, I've long since figured out the image of my anima. And also I've learned that, if I see somebody in a group that I'm very attracted to, that's my anima talking. It's not, it's not common sense. And, the big cat says Skip's wife is quite brilliant also. Yes, she is. And yes, I do love my mother. And So anyway, then the next question, Gestalt therapy is prayer meditation. How do you effectively navigate that? Well, from a Jungian point of view, I guess we would say you have to reflect on what's happening to you. You know, if you're depressed or whatever. Okay, if you're depressed or something's going on with you psychologically, you need to reflect on that. And for me, it's, you know, I don't have a rigid meditation model in my life. But for example, we've been talking about religious but not religious. This is a book by Jason Smith, and Jason Smith appeared here yesterday, so you can see his encounter with us for 2 hours yesterday. But as you see, when I read a book, this is my meditation. I underline, star, put side notes and such. And Dr. Jung was asked at one point, what is his spiritual practice? And he said, underlining books. And I realized that that's my spiritual practice too, because when I see a sentence that lands with me, that is meaningful to me, then I'll underline it. And if I think it's very meaningful, like here, I'll double underline it. And if I think a page is important, I'll circle the page or I'll put stars. There are not a lot of stars on that page, but for example, here, there are a lot of stars on this side. And this is the way I meditate, because I sort of give a hierarchy to what I'm reading, and that's my meditation. And then when I'm depressed or something, all I have to do is pick up any Jungian book and start reading at any point, and it starts connecting my mind back to this flow of tremendous experience. Thank you, Jan Doe, for that comment. Now, in terms of Gestalt therapy, I know nothing about that, and except that I know what a Gestalt blotch is, but other than that, I don't know. But in terms of prayer meditation, my wife, who's a very active Buddhist practitioner, she has a very specific, I would say, even rigid meditation regimen, where she'll meditate for 1.5 to 2 hours a day. I don't. I probably read a book for 1 hour a day and do my underlining, and that's my meditation. And then in a sense, I'm always meditating, because I'm always reflecting on what's happening to me in my life and how I can adjust what's happening in my life to have it work better every day, and that seems to work for me. So let's see. And so, Kari, I guess that's as much as I want to say about these topics right now. And Kari says, suppose a person is not married to the person they perceive as the anima and animus. Well, I mean, I think that's a personal call, and you have to decide the risks and benefits in your own life in terms of what you do. As I indicated, both of my wives met the pattern of my anima. And so there came a time, and that time was on January the 2nd, 1986, when I left my first wife and moved in with my second wife. I didn't, I didn't miss a day, in other words. And my first wife and I were together for 17 years. My second wife and I have been together for 35 years. And but in the first 3.5 years that my second wife and I were together, we were not married. And, that was no problem for us, nor was it any problem for any of our friends. And so we just went on with our lives. And what you may not know is that we claim to be the first couple to meet online and marry. And we met online on August the 22nd, 1985. We met physically for the first time on August 29th, 1985, which was 1 week later. And then we carried on a 4-month conversation over email primarily. We physically met, I guess, 3 times in that 4 months, but we were emailing 3 to 4 times a day. And so after that 4 months, I knew my wife, Deb, better than I knew my ex-wife. And when that tipping point was reached, then I moved out from one and moved in with another, and I've never looked back. And so that answered your question. Okay, so right. So Kati says it's a projection for me on a person I know. It is like unrequited love, and precisely that's what it is. Oh, it's Katie. Okay, Katie. So Katie, yes, it is unrequited love. Your unconscious is in love with that other person, but you physically can't be with that person for some reason, then yes, you have unrequited love. And so we live in a society that expects monogamy. And the problem is that human beings aren't necessarily monogamous. And but there are serious consequences to allowing that to affect your life. So in my case, when I made that switch, it took me 10 years to recover financially, 10 years. And so during much of that time, and this was true of my first wife too, when I left the Marine Corps, I went to law school, and my first wife basically earned our living during that 3-year period. She provided the housing and she provided the food and the money to live on while I went to law school, although, I had some money from the GI Bill, but not very much. And so basically the same thing happened with my second wife, where in the first 2 years of our lives together, she had to support me until I could get a new job, because I fell off the train one time, and it took me a while to get back. And so my wife did support me in both cases for a period of years. And then once I was able to engage my my education and the circumstances in which I was in, I was able to do much better than that. And so so that's the way it is when you're married. You both have to make sacrifices for one another if you believe that strongly. And so in the case of my second wife, she had to agree that we would not have any children because I had 3 daughters from my first wife, and I had already had a vasectomy when I met my second wife, and so there wasn't going to be any children in my second marriage, and that was a sacrifice that she made to in order to spend her time with me. And but fortunately, my natural daughters have accepted Debbie very much, and they respect her very much as a mother and her mother as a grandmother. And the result of that is that we can make it work. And also, I never had any animosity per se to my first wife. I just couldn't continue to live under the circumstances that I was living, which is why I left. And but I still love my first wife, but I love her like a sister rather than as a lover. So we have many times been at family gatherings together since our breakup, and we get along just fine. We respect one another, and I can say that I still love her, but as I said, like a sister. So anyway, I want to go back to Diane's book because we have come to the end, and so I wanted to re-emphasize the cover here. So here's the cover, and this is a very strange creature here with wings and so on. And so Diane at the back of the book says about the cover: the day I found this arresting sculpture by Forrest Rogers, I knew it embodied the spirit of this collection. But then I began to worry. It's a harpy. Harpies connote evil doings. Fortunately, one day I discovered this description of the Great Mother in Nor Hall's wonderful book, The Moon and the Virgin. Quote, before the wind-born bird became an attribute of goddess, gray-eyed Athena with her owl, for example, the Great Mother was represented as all bird. Her face is beaked and neck elongated birdwise. Some of the small sculptures have holes around the head and shoulders for the insertion of feathers. Of all possible bird capacities, flying, seeing at night, molting, nest making, singing, escaping prey, the one most celebrated in these ancient figures is that of egg laying and incubating. Many cultures have their origins to an egg cosmogony at the beginning of time. And what I haven't shown you is that the full image is shown in the back. That's the full image, which you cannot see on the cover, but you can see the full image has the talons down on an egg. Okay. But she only used the head and shoulders on the cover, and so you can't see the whole thing. And then the caption on the full picture is, "This harpy holds an egg in her bird hand. Might she represent some form of archetypal feminine that is evolving from all animal to animal as companion to true to her animal nature?" And the image is called Venetian Harpy by Forrest Rogers. And so, with regret, let's see. So with regret, there are acknowledgments here, but I'll leave you to read the acknowledgments when you get your own copy of Diane Croft's book. And I think that Diane has a website called The Unseen Partner, where you can purchase this book, or you can purchase it on Amazon. But if you can purchase it from Diane's website, I'm sure she would appreciate that directly. And so in many ways, I'm quite sad that I've come to the end of her book, because I've really enjoyed reading it and carrying it through to the end. And obviously I have a number of subscribers here who also enjoyed it. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to continue on with Jerry Wright's book. And Jerry Wright's book is a little bit different from this book, Religious But Not Religious by Jason Smith. But I really, really love Jason Smith's book too. It's just a really amazing book. And I think what I will do is probably start reading Religious But Not Religious in conjunction with Jerry Wright's book, because I still have more than half of Jerry Wright's book to go for these Sunday mornings. So what I'm going to do is I'll read the complimentary Jerry Wright piece here, and then I'll consider how to begin with Jason Smith's book, which I have so much respect for. So the next journal entry for Jerry Wright is, "The older I become, the more I am aware that there is a mystical fool within me at my core. Fortunately, that fool did not get analyzed away through many hours of psychoanalysis. It even survived a very traditional conservative seminary education. It is that mystical sense that has kept my soul alive, even as it has caused my soul much anguish. For the second half of my life, I have been a mystical fool without a religious home or tribe. My fool has been on a perpetual pilgrimage. Fortunately, I have found many temporary resting places. I think of them as mystical B&Bs that provide sufficient nurture before I move on." And I'm very sympathetic to what Jerry says here, because I think most of us born in the 20th century or the 21st century sometimes have problems with the numinous ideas which are in the Abrahamic religions, for example, or any other religion for that matter. We have been brought up on the scientific method, and that's all well and good, and that's all rational, but that does not help us with the irrational, which is what religions do. And what I noted about almost 50 years ago, 45 years ago, when I was a deacon in the Reformed Church, is I didn't know what religion was doing for me, but I knew that after I went to my services every Sunday, when I came out, I would feel better. And it seems entirely irrational, and I couldn't explain it, and therefore it did seem irrational. And of course, we're taught that everything has to be rational and an object and that sort of thing, but that's not what religions address. Religions address the irrational part of life, and so we need some form of religion or a religious outlook on our lives in order to survive. And in Dr. Jung's work, there's a quote which said, in his whole career as a psychotherapist, almost in every case, the main problem was the loss of faith, typically because of the scientific method, causing us to question cosmology in some way. And he said that, after 35, nobody was cured or healed unless they found a religious dimension in their life, because we all have a religious dimension in our life, just like hunger and sexuality and the need for sleep. We have a need for a dimension in our lives that relates to the irrational, and this relates to the difference between belief and faith. I remember the numinous moment when I first saw Dr. Jung's interview with the BBC, I believe, and he's asked, "Do you believe in God?" And he looks straight at the camera and says, "I have no need to believe. I know. And I had an epiphany at that moment, because I said, "Wow, I know too." But it took me 10 years to work out what it is that I know. And that's why I like Jason Smith's book so well, because he's really pulled it all together in one place. The material that I had to struggle with for 34 years, because for the first 18 years, I didn't read Dr. Jung's work directly. I had assumed that his collected works were all about clinical psychology, and that wasn't an area of my interest, not at all. I had already had a professional career as a lawyer, and as a lawyer, I knew that I was always dealing with other people's hardships in some way, and I didn't like that for my life. I didn't enjoy the practice of law. I did enjoy going to law school very much. It's very much like my way of reading books. And so I've always been able to study and learn things. And so I enjoyed going to law school, but then when I went into the practice of law, I literally detested it. And I was very surprised by that. But part of that is because it's dealing with the irrational side of life very often. So I knew that I didn't want to get into another profession that was like that. And so, I've always enjoyed teaching, for example. So teaching, like doing this, is the type of thing I like to do. Um, and but dealing with other people's hardships is not really in my wheelhouse. Um, so um, so I never studied Jung directly, although I read many books um, that were by disciples of Jung. So I knew what they had taken out, and all of that was very meaningful. And in 1990, I had found Man and His Symbols, and I had read that to my wife every night for a year, just before we went to sleep. And I realized at the end of it that we had basically had a year of psychotherapy by doing it that way. And but the point about Man and His Symbols is only a quarter of it was written by Dr. Jung. And so I still thought that the main essence of his collected works was about clinical psychology. And I wasn't interested in clinical psychology, and I know that Dr. Jung, in a sense, wasn't also. This is where the quote, "Thank goodness I'm Jung and not a Jungian," came from, because after 1948, when they created the C.G. Jung Institute in Zurich, the institute did focus on clinical psychology, and they sort of parted ways from. I mean, they still followed Jung, but not in the same way, because the collected works are really about culture and about religion, and not about the nuts and bolts of clinical psychology. And so that's the distinction that's being made there. And so when I started to read Jung directly in 2005, I was really amazed by what I was finding there. And it took me a long time. As I said, it took me 10 years to work out what he meant when he said, "I have no need to believe, I know." And I had the epiphany that I already knew at that moment, but I had to study another 10 years before I worked out what it was I know. And the nice thing about Jason Smith's book is that he's put all of that together. And so that's why I'm inclined to read that book next. Let me see what's being said on the chat here. And Jan Doe says, "How much weight would you give to the adage of marrying your best friend?" I would say that that's quite important. I mean, my wife and I were, the reason that I got basically drawn out of my first marriage was that my wife is quite an intellectual individual, and I enjoy an intellectual discourse. And my first wife was not. She was basically into, family life, but into just the security of having me to support the home that she was living in. But she didn't really want to talk to me. and so I think it's, if you're not, if your spouse isn't your best friend, then you probably have a problem. And so I would put a lot of weight to that. And the Big Cat says, I read Man and His Symbols in 1990. Also blew my mind. Yeah, I would do that. Good morning, Nick Lawrence. Nice to see you here. Yes, I'm doing quite well. As of now, I'm beginning my radiation therapy for prostate cancer on the 15th of this month, so a week from next Tuesday. And we'll see how I do. I'm going to try to continue my life, because the treatments, there will be 43 daily treatments on every business day. So that means 8.6 weeks of treatment. But the treatments themselves are very brief. So the total time taken out of my day, I expect to be about 1 hour, including travel time. And so I'm not concerned about it, because prostate cancer is curable, and my doctor says that we are going for a cure. And my father when my father had it, about 2 years younger than me, his urologist says, well, how long do you want to live? And my father said 30 years. And his doctor said, well, you won't die from prostate cancer. And so I told that story to my urologist, and he said, I would say the same thing. And that was, whatever it is, 25 years later. And so the one thing I will say, because most of the following on this YouTube channel are men, that please do make sure you have your physicals regularly, and have your PSA tested. And if you start to get high readings in PSA, make sure that you get to your doctor and get it addressed right away, which is what I'm doing. And so I'm not expecting any big interruption in my life from it. The bigger interruption may be in September, when I'm planning to have my hip replaced, because right now my hip has been bothering me for about a year, and I was actually scheduled to have it replaced on May 6th, but unfortunately, because of the cancer, I've had to put off the mechanical issue of the hip until after I get my radiation done. So that's what I'm doing. That's my plan. And I'm looking forward, hopefully, to being with you every Sunday morning. And we're going to continue on. So, we've finished with Diane's book, and I just want to urge everyone to get this book into your library. You won't regret it. It's The Unseen Partner, Love and Longing in the Unconscious by Diane Croft, because it really gives a non-rational way of looking at the individuation process. And I really thought, when I read it the first time, that it accomplishes that. And I can't say enough good things about this book. And so I really urge you to get yourself a copy. Now, and the same is true of Jerry Wright's book. I think he tells a lot of hard truths, but nonetheless, they're true. And so I would urge you to get his book as well. And because it really, debunks a lot of ideas that get pushed around in the world. So here's his next journal entry. It may be an act of grace that we do not live long enough for all our truth to be revealed as delusions. This is what children, grandchildren, and subsequent generations are for. Okay, yeah. So I guess that's the nature of the issue for everyone as we go forward. That that we never know the truth, the real truth. We have to find our truth, though, and that's sometimes not easy, but it does require us to reflect on what is true and what isn't true, and what is true about religion. While the myths as presented may not in fact be true, but from my point of view, they are true, because if I take the main events in the Bible, both Old Testament and New Testament, they're all dreams and visions, and I believe those are true. And so what the way I was taught it when I was a child was that it was this exterior fact that God was doing these things, like when Abraham decides not to slit Isaac's throat. When I was a kid, I would believe that God was this being that was causing Isaac not to kill his son, but obviously that wasn't the case. What was the case is that something inside Abraham woke him up and said, what are you doing, man? You're killing your oldest son. Or actually, it wasn't his oldest son. It was his second son, because his oldest son was Ishmael. But anyway, the story is that he had this vision that he could kill a goat. In his vision, a goat appeared, and so he sacrificed the goat instead of his son. And what my friend Rabbi Stephen Fuchs tells me is that was literally the end of human sacrifice in the Abrahamic religions. So that was a time when the human species had developed enough to realize that they didn't have to murder their kids in order to propitiate the gods and get the gods to be nice to them. And Katie says, live your truth. Yes, live your truth. Find your truth. So Katie says, the individuation process is in a nutshell. What is it? Okay. All right. So the individuation process is in 20 volumes of the work of C.G. Jung. It's in a nutshell in this, if you understand Jungian psychology. But if I boil it down until it has no life in it, whatever, then I would say it is recognizing wholeness, which includes recognizing the evil within yourself. That's one aspect of it. It involves, in terms of the Myers-Briggs scales, it involves, being able to see both sides of the equation. And so my most difficult area is in sensing and in intuition, because I happen to test out on the 99th percentile of intuition. And so what that means is that I'm basically blind to facts. You can tell me one or two facts and I'll tell you the whole story. And I simply make great leaps of assumption. And I've had a very broad life, lived in many parts of the world, and I've met all kinds of people and in all kinds of professions. And so, besides my education, which is fairly extensive, I know a lot. And so I can instantly see a connection between X and Y, for example. But sensing people have to be told this fact and this fact and this fact and this fact, and they still don't believe it. And so, and most people, I think, fall into the sensing range. And so individuation is getting yourself to the point where you can see the other side. And so, yes, I can do that. I'm trained to do that. I was trained to do that in the Marine Corps, in law school, and in business school. And because obviously you have to gather lots of facts together. And if you're going to do a business plan, you have to be able to draw in the facts. And so, it's like starting my Jungian teachings, which started about 11 years ago now, where I started a website called archetypeinaction.com. And, I just knew intuitively that there would be a demand for these things. And I think the most hits I have on the website is on an article I wrote called "The Big Lie in American Politics." And believe it or not, I wrote that article about a decade ago. And I think it has about 250,000 hits now. So I just intuitively knew that there would be a demand for these things. And what I didn't realize is how much of a demand, because very shortly after I started to publish the website, I was approached by my friend Melton Maricon and her sort of adopted daughter, Pinar Ogun, and they wanted to publish some of Melton's work on my website. And so if you had asked me in 2010, would I expect a Turkish novelist playwright to want to publish on my website, I never would have imagined it. But of course it happened. And the big aspect of that was that it changed all of our lives very much. And ultimately, Pinar, Melton, and two other Turks were Pinar's husband, and another lady became exiles from Turkey. And I was involved in the play in which caused the government of Turkey to get upset. And if you had asked me when we did it whether I thought it would cause a problem politically, I would have said absolutely not. I would have laughed. But now I know what the power is of these things. And so if you look at the cartoon Fantasia from 1940, which is available on YouTube, and look up The Sorcerer's Apprentice. There's several great clips of The Sorcerer's Apprentice on YouTube. And in The Sorcerer's Apprentice, Mickey Mouse is the apprentice of a sorcerer, and he's told to get something done, and he decides to use the magic wands of the sorcerer to get the brooms to do the work, which they do, but it gets out of hand, and finally it causes a flood and so on. And then the sorcerer comes back and goes, and stops the problem. And it's in this cartoon Fantasia, which is wonderful. But basically, that's what happened to us. We started to talk about things, and before long, we actually closed the play. We played it 25 times in Istanbul, and I'll just show you a picture I have, since I have it here on my desktop. I think I have to find it here. Let's see. Where is it? I can find it more easily this way. Desktop. So here's the play that we did in Istanbul, and so here's the play that we did, and what you're not knowing is that in this image, the play was about a dystopian country, but no country in the world specifically. And the way the play worked was that it was in an arena like a hockey rink, and the participants in this play, the lead was this gentleman who was the president of the country, who had a podium on one end of the hockey rink, and this large podium was 20 feet tall, and on the other end was a pianist, a street pianist, who was playing piano tunes for tips. And the president was making rules that were completely unacceptable to the population, and the audience comes in and becomes the population. So here you see the audience, and they are the population of the country. So they're in this play, they could either sit on the sidelines and just watch, or they could be out in the middle of the arena and be participating. And so, for example, one of the rules of this country was that women could not lick ice cream cones. That was, and obviously that's not a regulation in any country of the world that I'm aware of, but one of the regulations was that. And so the play goes on, and the pianist becomes more and more angry at these regulations that the president was setting up. And of course, it was quite popular because this man whose name is Mehmet Ali Alabora, was the president of the Actors Union in Turkey at the time. And the pianist in the play was his wife, who was one of the most popular actresses in Turkey. And so many people came. And, you know, the big cat says Erdogan would not have approved the play. Well, he said nothing about it during the time that we were performing it, which was a 5-month period. And during that period, it was, you know, many government officials came to it. It was covered by CNN Turk and many other news outlets. And so my role in it was to run a Twitter feed. And what I didn't know until the 4th performance was that they were live streaming the play, so I could see it every time it was played and the performance as it was being played. And then I could respond to what was going on in the performance on Twitter, which I was doing. But what I didn't know until the 4th performance was they were projecting my Twitter feed on the wall of the play. and so after the play took place, the Gezi Park demonstrations took place about 6 weeks later after we had closed the play. And the right-wing political party said that the play had been a rehearsal for Gezi Park, which was not the case at all, and was not in our intention. But you know, in 2020 hindsight, I have to say that it was like that scene in Fantasia that I'm talking about. And so it was very interesting experience, and I mostly experienced it at great distance from the other side of the world. But nonetheless, I'm not planning to go back to Turkey anytime soon. So anyway, let's see. Yeah, so N1 says my INFP can be a bit overpowering for people, so I have to calm it down. Yeah, well, I have to calm down my N very much, and so I have to recognize that there are other factoids out there that I may not know, facts that I may not know, as I indicated from my discussion of that play. And so, you know, even though I knew that the play was going on and knew that I was participating in it, as I said, I didn't know that they were projecting my Twitter feed on the wall of the theater. And so that made me quite famous in Turkey at one point. And I've only physically been to Turkey about 3 weeks, or 1 week in my life, one total week in my life, 3 trips. And so, you know, if you had told me rationally in 2011 that I would be involved in a play which would threaten the government of Turkey, I would have said, wow, you're nutso. But now I do acknowledge that, you know, at least in part, President Erdogan's analysis was correct, although there was no intention involved. And so nobody was intentionally trying to overthrow the government of Turkey. And if you had asked that question while we were performing it, there would have been nobody that would say that we were in any way putting the government of Turkey at risk, but nonetheless, that's what we got blamed for. So, there's always the unexpected, the irrational. So let's see what else we have here. Okay, I'll read one more from Jerry's book. So this is, I'm reading from A Mystical Path Less Traveled. I'm only on page 52 of a book that goes into the 170s, so we have quite a long way to go yet. So Jerry has this journal entry. When did you lose touch with your natural mystical sensibilities, your capacity for wonder and awe and attention to the little ongoing miracles? When Jesus implored, let the little children come to me, he might have said, let the little mystics come to me. He was speaking to religious leaders who had lost touch with their mystical nature due to elaborate religious rituals and laws and blood sacrifices to appease an external God. Our lives are a series of mystical moments, yet we have grown calluses around our senses and more severely around our souls. The moment by moment miracles go unnoticed. And so I'm sure most of you can remember your childhood in which various things would happen, mysteriously happen. And they were magic. I remember once when I was in the Cub Scouts, and we were going to do a Halloween meeting of my Cub Scout pack, and it was going to be a costume event. So we had to come costumed, and I didn't have any costume. I had no thought about how to create a costume. And my mother said, well, I'm going to send you in as Sir Lancelot, complete with a horse. And, I was 9 years old or something like that. And so the night before this meeting, I had no clue what she meant or how I would do that costume. And in the morning, I woke up and she'd been working on it all night. And she had a bunch of sheets and a bunch of bent up coat hangers. And I still didn't understand how I was going to be Sir Lancelot. But when I came home from school, she had completed the costume. And the way it worked was that the frame that she had created overnight with the coat hangers was shaped like a boat, and I would stand in the middle of it, and then she put straps over my shoulders so that this boat would hang at my waist, and that would be my horse, and the sheets would hang down all the way to the floor, so you couldn't see that it was two human legs under there instead of 4 horse legs. And then she created a head for this horse, and I don't know, some sort of costume for me as a knight. And so it was quite dramatic when I came in with this costume on, and I was literally a horse and rider coming into this Cub Scout meeting. And that as I think about it, that was quite, from my 9-year-old point of view, that was quite mystical. It was just totally magic what my mother had done. But anyway, it was very impressive. And so we need to have that kind of awe, the kind of awe that we have as a child. And so I'm going to stop with that today. And so this is June the 6th, and I'll begin with that next week. And I'm going to read in tandem next week, also from a religious but not religious. And I'll start with that reading as well, and we'll talk through that. As you see from my book, there's lots of underlining there. So there are a lot of things that I think are important in that book, and I will be sharing that. And interestingly, one chapter of this book is what Jung teaches, and that's actually chapter 9, I think. Chapter 8. Chapter 9 is what religions teach, and then chapter 10 is experiential consciousness. So there's a lot of very interesting material here. And so I will start reading this book and talking about it sentence by sentence next week. I hope you'll join me, and please contact Chiron Publications and get this book, and so that you can follow along with me. You'll be better off if you do that. Living a Symbolic Life, and then you'll see what I mean. And it's a very good primer for Jungian psychology in general. So I'll look at your comments one more time, and then we'll call it a day. Peace, Yuan. Nice to see you. She says, how great was your mother? Yeah, my mother was a force of nature. There's no question about that. Everybody who ever knew her knew that. She sucked every bit of juice out of her life that she could. So Katie says, you could do the personality test on Free Personality Test online. Yes, there is an abbreviated MBTI test for free online. Just put MBTI online test or something into Google or Bing or whatever, and it will pop right up. And then you can take the online test, which is not a full MBTI, but it is enough to probably type you if you don't have your personality type. So yeah, and as N1 says, the INFP aspect can become overwhelming, and sometimes we have to tone it down. And I don't often tone down my intuition, but sometimes I know things long before they happen, and I have to keep my mouth shut because, for example, if you predict, let's say, the end of a relationship or something like that, that's not very helpful to the relationship. And so it's better to just let the forces of life happen, because if you say that, then you're going to pile on that relationship. So, it's better to just let it happen, let people have the experience, and then they know what to do in the future. Thank you, Clifton and Katie and one big cat. Thanks, everybody. Okay, so we're going to wrap it up for this morning, and I'll see you next week at 8 a.m.